on our Facebook page group. So thank you for being here. And without further ado, we want to make this as interactive of a conversation as possible while we're in the virtual space. We do ask, because we're in a meetings, that you mute your microphone, but if you would like to ask any questions, please feel free to add it in the chat here in the Zoom chat or on the Facebook chat board. We will always bring your conversations, your questions into the conversation. And so what I would love to do is just have the panelists kind of self-introduce themselves so that the audience can know you a little bit better. And so I will start off. I'm probably going to do, since in our post we've been doing things alphabetically, I'll go backwards. So I'll start with Lubna first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lubna Zaidan. I go by Lou, which I will explain later during this evening. I am a Lebanese American. I was born in Texas, but my family are of Lebanese descent. I grew up in Lebanon and lived half my life between both countries. My day job is I am the program director, the refugee program director at Interfaith Action of Central Texas, IACT. So I work every day with refugees from all over the world. Very privileged to have that job. Thanks.
Thank you, Lubna. And how about Banashai?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I am a recovering professor of philosophy. And I'm currently I see Saba smiling, and the executive director and founder of Interconnecting Arabs, Muslims, and Middle Easterners. What else do you want to know, Emmeline? Is that it? I can't hear you.
Just an introduction of yourself and your background and
Sure. I am an immigrant. I came here from Iran to go to college when I was 19. Waited a whole year to get a visa to come. Yeah. And that's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And how about Roy? Oops, I think you're on mute, Roy.
We've only been in Zoom land for a year and a half. You'd think I could figure this out. I only teach online. So this is clearly government level incompetence because I am officially a government employee. So I'm a professor of government. And I'm always really torn about how much I want to say about myself, because 9/11 has taught me all sorts of really neat things. Like if you can hide like a snake in the grass, get in that grass and hopefully it's tall. I am half Egyptian. I am half European. That is something that I have learned to really reluctantly share with people. It's not because I'm not proud of it. I totally am, but there are consequences. And so,
oops, it's out now.
It's out now. And Arab. And on that note, let me pass it on.
Thanks so much. And then how about Saba?
Hi, my name is Saba Liswas. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm originally from Yemen. I lived in the States for about 4 years. I lived in middle of nowhere, like Iowa and Wisconsin. And I left around like halfway through the Trump presidency after I lost all faith in America and moved to Canada. Today I'm excited to share with everyone what caused me to lose faith in the States. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Saba. And Saatvik?
Everyone, Saatvik Ahluwalia, pronouns are he, him. I'm the digital director at both Progress Texas and the Austin Asian Civic Communities Coalition. Saba, I kind of took the opposite journey. During Trump time, I came from very liberal, progressive Massachusetts. And I said, I need to go fix this. I came down here to Texas. So I am that liberal coastal elite that you hear about on Fox News all the time. And I'm down here and deep in Texas. And I'm just really happy to be here with all of y'all.
Thank you all so much. And again, to the audience members, either here on Zoom or in Facebook, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat board. You can direct message them to me or put them in the chat board, and we'll share that to the panelists throughout the conversations. But again, I am excited for this conversation because I feel like it is so important for our society to recognize the continual discrimination, the continual feeling of otherisms to communities of color, particularly in this conversation, to the Muslim, Middle Eastern, brown communities, that especially in the past 20 years, since 9/11 and the terrorist attacks in the States, has been just this, level of not feeling like we're the communities are citizens and threats to America, right? And so if I could have a panelist, like maybe one or two panelists, share a little bit of the historical backgrounds of the anti-Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, the brown communities, people, like the sentiment pre and post 9/11, and just kind of give us, the audience, a little bit more historical context. I would love to hear from anyone that has more knowledge than me about this. I think earlier, Roy, you mentioned that you would, so I'll let the professor speak first.
All right, so actually the anti-Arabness that I want to start early. And it's worth pointing out that it's actually inherently tied to anti-Blackness as well. In fact, I think Benafsha will probably build on what I say, because I'm going to point out that the whole thing of whiteness actually originated in Spain, and she's a better expert on this, so I'm not going to go into detail about this, but that whiteness was specifically an anti-Muslim thing. So the whiter you were in Spain, the less Muslim heritage you had. And then, of course, that got tied into the US identity. So if you were to look at the United States in 1760, we were 40% Black and 60% mostly English, but with some Irish and Scottish mixed in there, some German. And that population, that Black population, was mostly enslaved, and about half of it was Muslim. And what that meant was that the third largest religion in the United States in 1760 was Islam. And so one of the things that the colonial period and then later on into the revolution, post-revolution United States, that one of the programs that we had was to de-Muslimize the slave population. And of course, it was wildly successful. Today, the United States, at the time, the United States was about 20% Muslim. Today, the United States is about 1.5% Muslim. So this was a really incredibly successful project. One of the strange things about the United States is the country that we had our first foreign relations with was actually Morocco. Morocco is the first state on earth to recognize the United States. It is our oldest friendship. It goes back to even before France sided with us in the revolution. But then one of our first military actions that we ever undertake is the Barbary pirate raid. And so we've got this really strange early history that sort of pulls and pushes back and forth. And for the most part, after the Barbary pirates and the founding of the United States Marine Corps, and that history that you probably read about it with Thomas Jefferson in grade school, after that period, we really just sort of ignore the Middle East. There are moments when it comes up. For example, in the Civil War, when the Yankees couldn't buy cotton from the South anymore, they turned to places like the Ottoman Empire to buy their cotton. And if you look at 1861, 1862 pictures of battlefields, sometimes you'll see Yankee soldiers that look like they're dressed in Muslim garb, and that's because they were getting Ottoman uniforms. And so there's this really strange, like occasional, some sort of relationship pops up and then it goes away. And that was the case really up until 1980. So a way to think of this is almost no US soldiers died in the Middle East, or any Muslim country for that matter, prior to 1980. And since 1980, almost no US soldiers have died anywhere else. In other words, there was this really dramatic shift in our foreign policy, and that dramatic shift has forced this sort of rethinking of what it is to be Muslim, what it is to be Arab, the villainization of that population in the process, the racialization of that population in the process. And you know, there were moments where it looked like it would go the other way. So for example, if you were Turkish, Persian, Jewish, or Arab, you were considered white beginning in 1908. And what that meant was you could achieve citizenship, because prior to 1908, if you were from Asia, you could not be a citizen. You could not be a naturalized citizen. You had to be born in the United States. That was the only path to citizenship. And so now all of a sudden, Lebanese and Palestinian and Syrian and Iraqi and Iranian and Turkish Middle Easterners could in fact become US citizens. And so it was almost like this thing of, oh, you're white, that's cool, we'll bring you in. And then of course, in the last 40 years, we've seen the exact opposite. In fact, in 2017, the Census Bureau they held we have 5 races in the United States. They held a conversation to have a 6th race, and it would be Middle East and North African. And the decision was made to go ahead and not do it, at least at this time, because in 2017, Trump was president. And the assumption was that nobody from that background would ever click that on the Census Bureau data because of his threats to have a Muslim ban and the history of Germany in 1933, that kind of thing. Let me hand it over to another person, because I know we don't want to talk. I shouldn't spend too much time on this history.
No, well, thank you for that, Dr. Casaganda, because history is important, right? And a lot of times we aren't learning the proper history. It's not taught to us in schools. The media shares a little bit different narrative. And so I so appreciate that history. But Banusha, did you want to share some more thoughts too?
Yeah, sure. So Roy mentioned the racialization of Muslims, of Middle Easterners, and of Arabs. And I wouldn't mind talking about this for a couple of minutes at least, because I think folks are confused about the difference between being racialized and being a race already. And in our mind, if we go back to the specification, the late mid 1800 specifications of Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid, right? Those are the 3 races that we understand and that we're familiar with. That seems to set the base. And then all of a sudden, when it's really confusing when we're talking about the racialization of a people. For instance, we talk about the Latinx population, or we talk about the Iranians, the Arabs, who are specifically, and all of this population who are non-Black, because we have plenty of Arabs who are Black, plenty of Iranians who are Black, plenty of Muslims of all sorts who are Black. But specifically for the non-Black population, it's kind of confusing when we use the word racialization. And the racialization specifically refers to the following. I'll just talk about myself, when I enter a space in the United States that is majority white, which is most of the times, what happens is I immediately stand out as not being white. Everybody automatically knows I am not a white person. However way white has been defined for us, we don't want to go into that. It's automatic, right? And so I'm already put into a particular category that does not jive with what I am asked to tick on that census or on the application, whatever application it is, right? Which I don't. So there is that jarring moment where I am asked to hide and become invisible in the white, under the white category. Whereas as soon as I enter that room, I am immediately understood not to be white, not just by the white folks, but by everybody. And now ever since 9/11, we now have been really, we've become sensitized to what a person like me from my region looks like. Maybe we weren't quite as sensitized before, but now we know, right? And so there are a lot of theories about why we were put under the white category. And of course, the most, in my eyes, the one that makes the most sense is because white folks have always tried to increase their numbers to remain a majority. And so this is yet another one of those. And you know, it's a really interesting inclusion because it's pushing us away at the same time that it's including us to fatten up numbers. So keeping us in our place at the same time, you know, yeah. So I enter that room, I look different as soon as I start speaking. In my case, I've been able to, you know, maybe it's not immediately obvious that I have an accent, but I say my name. I say my name, the game's over. Game's over. And of course, once we start talking politics, everybody moves away and I'm by myself. Well, not everybody, you know, but in specific circles. So racialization is about that kind of hierarchical placement. And where my entry into a particular space immediately puts me into a hierarchy. Understandably, Black folks are way at the bottom, and I have many privileges when compared to them. Speaking of anti-Blackness that Roy brought up. And Black folks who are Muslim are, you know where they are. But yeah.
Thank you for that. It's such a, thank you for that explanation. And it's historical, sociological, you know, like philosophical, everything that is present in present day modern like society. And so thank you for your words, because it wasn't just this historical context, it was like the history and the definitions and how we all get kind of socialized in that capacity. So let's, you know, fast forward a little bit and, you know, definitely want to invite the other panelists to share more of like, especially 9/11. I feel like 9/11 was this tipping point of more political, more social, more racialized, in my view, because at that time I was, you know, in my mid-20s and, you know, my first career in my professional world, I actually was in the hospitality tourism industry. So that changed significantly, you know, the fear of traveling, the fear of the other cultures, and really was my wake-up call of recognizing like the American privileges that I had, as well as then the white privilege and the white supremacy in our nation and in our global world. And so with the other panelists, can you share more like of your personal stories of, you know, the impact that 9/11 had on you, your family, your communities? And so I'm happy to kind of do this as a popcorn style if somebody wants to share.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. My family and I were living in Lebanon up to 2001, actually, for about 10 years. And we came in July 2001. My children, my youngest was in 7th grade, and he was in school when 9/11 happened, and he had, you know, they had just started school. So he was in a new country with a new group of people, and just newly in America in school. And he had already introduced himself like the week or two before by being someone who'd been in Lebanon, that he's from Lebanon. And then 9/11 hit, and there was a Lebanese terrorist on board one of those airplanes. And suddenly he became a target in his class and in his school without him realizing why, until, people started calling him a terrorist. And being a seventh grader, he was not much of a sharer, male and seventh grade. So he did not really tell me what was happening, but he was being bullied all through that school year and the next at the same school. Until he got to new classes, they'd ask him, "Where are you from?" And he'd say, "I'm from Greece." Finally, when he told me he was telling people he was from Greece, I was saying, somebody Greek is going to show up and try to speak Greek to you. And he said, I'll just deal with that if it ever happens. So it wasn't until high school that he started telling people again that he's from Lebanon. So that sort of symbolized to me what was happening to people depending on your environment. And being in school, I think, makes people most vulnerable, especially middle school.
Absolutely. I thank you for sharing that, Lubna. Especially, I would say, middle school, as a student, it's like you want to just always belong and fit in, and how, whether it's students and peers and even teachers and administrators try to otherize us. And Saatvik, can you share a bit about your story? I just love when you shared with the Brave Makers last summer, someone from being South Asian, and how 9/11 just kind of changed. And I know, like, one of the first incidents after 9/11 was in Arizona, where anyways, I'll let you share, because I just want to hear your story.
Well, first of all, Lubna, I got chills when you spoke about your son, because I was about the same age too. I was in 6th grade. But I was born here, and I had all my friends throughout elementary school and into middle school, and I vividly remember being called into homeroom because everyone didn't know what would be attacked next. And I'm from Lexington, Massachusetts, which is the birthplace of America. So we thought, okay, maybe this is a place that'll be struck next. We go home, and the TV is on. My mom is crying, and I don't know why. And then I find out we've been attacked, all of us, and or at least that's how I perceived it then. And I go to school the next day hoping that we'll grieve together, but instead all the eyes turn on me. And even folks who I've grown up with, who I've been friends with my whole life, they look at me as though I did this to them. And looking back on it today, I understand where the children came from, my peers, because that's what they heard on TV. It's what they heard from elected leaders, from people on news. So it makes sense why they thought that I was the bad guy. But everyone in my family experienced this too. My dad used to run a liquor store, and he was assaulted and talked about, he was called a raghead. My mother-in-law walked into work the next day at Pfizer, and she worked in the HQ, and one of the secretaries said, "Go back to your country." And she'd been here for almost 15, 20 years. So I don't think there was a single, brown or light-skinned person like many of you who didn't experience this othering. And for me personally, what it did is I didn't want to be brown anymore. And I spent probably the next 10 years trying to be as white as possible. But the sun is shining in my face right now. You can't tell I'm quite dark. But I bought a pumice stone, and I used to scrub my skin in the shower when I was younger, because I thought maybe that would make me whiter. And I went to go buy, I would save up every dollar to go buy clothes at Abercrombie and Fitch, because that was the place that all the cool white kids shopped. And what I discovered was none of that would change who I was. And so it kind of led me ultimately onto what I think is maybe a beautiful journey of rediscovering my heritage and really embracing what that meant for me, which was dance. And I think what it led me down is I didn't see anyone who looked like me saying, "You're still a good person, you're still lovable, you're still unique." And I wanted to become that. And so, I was one of the youngest Asian Americans ever elected to office in Massachusetts at the age of 22. And now I do this work. And when the Stop Asian Hate, when with the rise of Asian hate during this pandemic, I said, this is my chance to be that person that I never had. And so for any of you who are in Austin, we held, the largest Stop Asian Hate rally in the US at the time, over 1,000 people. And the best part was looking out there and seeing these little kids, and they got to see people who looked like them. and who didn't look like them saying, we love you. You are, you're, man, I'm sorry. This is it's hard because I also had I have a 5-month-old. And I experienced this when I was 11, and like kids my age, like 11-year-olds experienced it last year. And I just, I want to be able to leave a place where she doesn't write in 30 years that, I experienced the same thing. And so, 9/11 just passed like less than a month ago, and it's all been in my head. I hope I didn't ramble too much, but that, that was, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, we do have a lot of work to do. Saba, I've told maybe in the beginning with the panelists when we're meeting together, I know Saba, she's like a daughter to me. So in 2015, 2016, I get the years blurred all together. I was asked to help a nonprofit in Virginia that helps out with some State Department programs, and there's a group of students every high school exchange students. So Saba is originally from Yemen, and she was doing a high school exchange in Iowa, and then that summer, due to the war, wasn't able to return home. So for the whole summer, I got to spend time with her and 26 other my family members. And so I just would love for you to share your story. I know you may have been, I don't even know if you were born at 9/11, but your story, and actually, why you're studying now. And you had a TPS visa in for America, but then you chose to study in Canada. So if you don't mind sharing your story, we would love to hear that.
Yeah, so like you said, I went to the States as an exchange student in high school. I was like 15 at the time in 2014. And, I was born and raised in Yemen. So I honestly did not know what 9/11 was until I was like 13, because my brother also did like an exchange year. And when he was in school, people were kind of like calling him a terrorist because of 9/11, and like 9/11 was news to me at the time. Like those were the most peaceful 13 years of my life, and I have not known peace since. And it was interesting, like once I moved to the States and really saw to what extent Islamophobia was. I mean, it was, I'm sure it wasn't anything like what things were like in 2001, but around that time there were a lot of like Islamic terrorism going on. So there was a lot of Islamophobia, and it was interesting to go from living in a Muslim country where like being Muslim is not even like an identity that I like carried. Like it's not something that I would say when I would introduce myself, and then to come to the States and for that to become the most like core part of my identity almost, and understand how the West views us. It was like shocking to an extent, like the questions that was asked, where it was just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm all for people like trying to learn everything, but to be asked like, oh, do you have terrorist family members, was a bit much. I don't know. But it was a very interesting experience, especially for like a teenager to be expected to like be able to answer questions about such complex political issues. And like people just expect you to know that stuff. I'm like, I don't know, I'm 15, like what do you want me to do? But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I've learned a lot from it, and I feel like my sense of self changed a whole lot when I realized that whether I identify as those identities that are imposed on me or not, they're still gonna be like imposed on me, so I might as well own them in a way. So yeah, it was an interesting experience.
Thank you for that. And then can you share a little bit more of, I know that you started attending a school, a university, was it in Wisconsin? And then what led you to want to study in Canada, in Montreal?
Yeah, so I lived in Wisconsin for a couple of years. I was going to college there, and those were the 2 years. It was like 2017, 2016 to 2018, and that's when the Trump presidency happened, the first like half of it. And in 2017, the Muslim ban was passed. And on that very day, I decided that I absolutely don't want to stay in the States because it is truly like humiliating to be told, like, I don't know, that I don't belong essentially. And I think it was different for me than it is for like Muslim Americans because I'm not American and I've never carried the identity. So it was, there wasn't as much of an attachment there. And I just, as soon as I felt like there was no place for me there, no matter, especially like in the Midwest, like people are racist to your face. So I just knew that I didn't want to stay in a place like that, and I was looking for somewhere better. And because America has this kind of glorified image of Canada, I thought Canada was the next best thing. So I looked into it, and I made the move. I left America, and I've been here for 2 years. But the funny thing is, I realized that people are just as racist here, honestly. So it's just a different flavor of racism. In a way, I've come to appreciate American racism because at least it's in your face. Canadian racism is so covert. And actually, I live in like French Canada. I feel like it is a bit more, it's less hidden. It is institutionalized. There's this controversial bill called Bill 21 that bans government workers from wearing any religious symbols, kind of like the law that they have in France. So it is all about like secularism and trying to protect the like Quebec identity, the Francophone identity. So that law is constitutional in Canada, and it is still in place. And I don't think many people know about it. But yeah, Islamophobia is thriving in Canada for anyone who didn't know.
Thank you, Saba. And again, to the audience members, if you have any questions here or on Facebook, feel free to drop them in the chat. Now, as we talk about Islamophobia and just the xenophobia and all the fear that happens, right? I think that's the issue is like, how do we respond to fear and misinformation and misrepresentation that's often portrayed, by our leaders, by our media, by, elected officials. So like, do any of you have any words of wisdom of like, one, how do you, how do you have the courage and be brave to respond to these fears and this misinformation? And how can we as a community, whether that's individually or as a community, we want to be better allies. Does anyone want to share your words of wisdom?
I can, since I'm faster to the draw here. I'm lucky enough to work in an organization called Interfaith Action of Central Texas, whose aim is to break down barriers between people. So the agency itself aims to bring people of all faiths and backgrounds and ethnicities together to communicate and to break down the barriers. And there are different programs that do that, but the technique is basically listening. If you sit across the table from someone and you're forced to listen to that someone, you see your humanity reflected in that other person. So basically, the cure of all of this fear is to get to know each other. Unfortunately, you can't force another person to widen their horizons and go look for a different kind of person to get to know. And that is a problem. However, more people and more groups working at that could maybe make a little dent in what the issues are. And another thing on the personal level, I'd say speak up. And I'm not one to be confrontational. I have never been confrontational, and I try to avoid any kind of confrontation by nature. But I've had to train myself to speak up when you see something that is really unacceptable, and sometimes even something as like a flippant comment that people may say. What in the past I would say, well, okay, they didn't mean it, or yeah, it was just said in jest, or make excuses for that person. I force myself not to make excuses for people anymore, and just like point it out. You don't have to be fighting with the person, but just say that's a really racist comment, and that would hurt somebody else if they had heard you say that. And something like that may open the eyes of some people, because some people do that without realizing it. Or maybe it would make them look inward and try to change some aspects of themselves that way.
Saatvik? Sorry, I'm on mute.
No, it's okay. So I work in the digital world, and I spend all day thinking about how do I talk about progressive values because the work I do, and how do I get those values in front of lots of people. And the reality is a lot of the thoughts that people have about Arabs or brown folks or insert whatever group comes through this really filtered propaganda from elected leaders, from like trolls, from whatever. So I think it's really like it doesn't feel fair for me to have to do the work to deprogram someone else who feels like that brown people are bad. But in actually meeting a brown person for the first time in their life, like they will start seeing that like we're not all this caricature. And I found that worked in my own life when I worked at a company that was basically a lot of folks from the Midwest, and they had never met a brown person in their life, and they had all these assumptions, which were obviously not true because they met me, who was not the way they thought it would. The other thing I would say is like, don't wait to be given the space. Go and take the space for yourself. If you are a citizen of the U.S., like go run for office. You're allowed to do that, and I encourage you to, because that normalizes your community in the US. Like the more Asian Americans we see like in Congress or in City Hall or whatever it is, the more we can say that person looks like me, they represent me. But for everyone who they don't look like, okay, these people are here, so to speak. And I think that's like very important, not only for like our community today, but also for like young folks who say, what do I do? Who do I go to? Who's like me, who understands this stuff? If you want to if you want to like do entertainment related things, right? Like go and act, or like if you have friends who do it, support them. I had a friend who wanted to create a show I would never watch myself because it was like very out there. But he was another Indian guy who wanted to like get in the space where there's not a lot of representation. I was like, fine, I'll donate $500 to this because I believe in you. And even if this isn't the show that gets you to where you want to go, it'll help you take those steps. And I think there's a lot of little ways that like we can help people in our community get to that next step, so that they can create the spaces that we want to create for ourselves and for our children.
Thank you for that, Saatvik.
Just gonna jump in. If I love something that Saatvik said earlier. Saatvik, when you said you were at that rally, and you just remembered that when you were at that age, there was nobody around to tell you you're fine, you're good, you're great just the way you are. To celebrate the culture that you come from, to celebrate the legacy of your ancestors, of people who came before you, the rich, humongously rich culture that you come from. And so I have to say, when 9/11 happened, and since the 20 years since, what's really stood out for me is that we still as a people. First of all, we're not a people, number one. We got Black folks, we got Latinx folks. We even have a mishmash of Asian folks, right? But I don't know where to put the Muslims, Arabs, and the Middle Easterners. And of course, there's a lot of Asians who are in there, right? There's a lot of Black folks who are in. It's an incredibly diverse swath of the United States. First of all, we're not a people, and we still don't even know how to talk about the event. We don't. We talk amongst ourselves, but we are terrified to actually talk about what we feel about the event. Not just the fact that we were blamed, but also US foreign policy and how that was tied to what happened. We can't talk about that. It's terrifying. There were professors who were fired because they talked about that immediately afterwards. That kind of set a precedent. You don't go there. And so a lot of what we've done in the last 20 years is try to be as white as we can, act as white as we can, shut our mouths up, get as adjacent and as close to whiteness as we can, because it's scary. And so somehow I was studying a critical race theory for Muslims, racialization of Muslims, when I was in academia. And I realized, what am I doing? I'm writing for what? If I'm lucky, 50 people, 100 people, maybe 1,000. Never, but like, let's just pretend. And we don't even have a language on the ground to talk about ourselves. What we need is community building. What we need is to remember and celebrate the cultures, the very diverse, rich cultures that we come from. We actually have a lot to offer this culture, this white culture. So much so that Rumi becomes a celebrate, like what Madonna is reading Rumi. Never once did I read anywhere that Rumi was Muslim. In fact, I didn't, and that was intentional, bad marketing. And so I would say it's time for us not to hide. It's time for us to figure out how to be together and not check the white box. They don't want us, and this is not necessarily a thing we want to be a part of.
So I'm going to use that to jump in. So when I was a kid, my moment wasn't 9/11, it was actually the Iranian Revolution. And the reason was not because I'm Iranian, but because the place of worship that we used to go to in Denver, Colorado, got firebombed, even though it was an Egyptian place, because my community, the community of white people around me, didn't know the difference between an Iranian and Egyptian. And for me, that was actually a really important moment, because I realized that that's what we were. We were this group of people that thought we were different. The Egyptians were like, how can they attack us? We're Americans, we're white, we're not Iranians. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I think I know where this is going. We are Iranians, we just don't recognize it, and they're Egyptians and they don't recognize it. And the next moment for me was, I was probably 11 or 12, and I had a mentor when I was a kid, and she loved to play Scrabble. And she had these two friends that would come over and play Scrabble. And one day she just turned to him and she said, he's an Arab. This is a little Arab boy. And they gave me the nastiest look. Like if their eyes were daggers, they would have torn me to shreds. And in that moment, I realized, oh my God, like I'm not just some innocent little kid anymore. There's something extra going on here. And I grew up being called sand and then insert N-word, raghead, camel jockey. I got it, right? And at some level, I just sort of embraced it and let it bounce off of me. And so through one of the things that was going on during all of this was Reagan had ramped it up and had decided he was going to make the Middle East his showcase for how he was going to make his presidency seem powerful. And this is in the aftermath of what Kissinger did in the 1970s to sow chaos in the Middle East. And so here's Kissinger creating all this chaos. He leaves, Reagan becomes president. Reagan starts bombing Libya. Reagan is, sending soldiers to Lebanon. Marines are getting killed. It's chaos. He convinces Iraq to attack Iran. The Iran-Iraq war becomes a proxy war for the United States, where we can kill Iranians, but using Iraqi bodies to do it. 1 million people die. The war lasts for a ridiculous amount of time. Nothing is gained from it. And then the United States decides to blow Iraq up. And it was like, wait a minute, this was your ally whom you used to do the proxy war against Iran, and you turned on them like it was nothing. It never even occurred to you that that was weird. And it was because we were subhuman. We were nothing more than dogs. And you could just murder the hell out of us. And the world didn't seem to care. And under Clinton, he starved and cut off the medicine for 800,000 Iraqis, 500,000 of whom were age 5 and under. This is a UN stat. This isn't like some outrageous stat that came out of some conspiracy theory. It was actually brought up to Madeleine Albright on a 60 Minutes episode. And she said, if I could do it again, I would do the exact same thing. You would kill 500,000 little babies. They were age 5 and under. And every time I heard this, what I heard was, you're dogs. You don't deserve to live. In fact, I was arrested protesting the first war. And in the act of being arrested, a white woman walked up to me and she said, you deserve to die like the Iraqis. And I was like, well, how did they even deserve to die? This is insane. What did they do that was so horrible that you're bombing their country? And then here's what's really strange. All of a sudden, in the late 90s, it became okay to think that the Palestinians had a right to a state. All of a sudden, there was this peace process. All of a sudden, Clinton was so involved and he was trying to make a deal for a 2-state solution. And in 2000, y'all probably, some of you might remember this, there were actually pro-Palestinian demonstrations outside Israeli embassies. And it looked like, and then Hezbollah defeated Israel in Lebanon and drove Hezbollah out of Lebanon. And all of a sudden, it looked like there was this possibility that the Palestine-Israel conflict could be resolved, and then 9/11 happened. And the next thing you know, we murder another 1.3 to 2 million Iraqis. And of course, not a single one of the hijackers was an Iraqi. and Iraq was an avowed enemy of Al-Qaeda. And so at that point, now you're just randomly attacking Muslim countries. You're just killing us because you don't have any use for us. You want us exterminated. Arabs are 6% of the world's population. I mean Arabs. I'm not being sloppy with my language. I'm not including Turks or Persians. It's just Arabs, 6% of the world's population. By contrast, the United States is 4.5%. So just to give you an idea how big the Arab world is. If the Arab world were unified into a single state, it would be bigger than the United States in land mass. We are 50% of the world's refugees. And the world is right now going through the worst refugee crisis in human history, even making the refugee crisis in World War II look like a picnic. So we are 50% of the world's refugees, overrepresented by 8 times our portion of the population, at a time when the world is having a catastrophe of epic proportions. And of course, in the aftermath of 9/11, to have a conversation like, well, maybe you should re-examine your foreign policy, it wouldn't make so many people so angry, is anathema. Like, oh no, this is not our fault. You hate us. You did this to us. I'm done.
Thank you for that mic drop. Actually, to carry on with what Dr. Casagrande was talking about as far as the refugees now, right, and the Afghanistan refugees, can any of you share, especially at the organizations, I know I act as actively involved, and I am, of what can we as a community do? You know, I know, you know, like not only for the refugees, but also as a community, how do we build, you know, the voices, how do we listen better? How do we support and serve, especially the next generation? You know, we're talking about these kids and the generations, like the Sabas, the future leaders. How do we, or current leaders, how do we embrace all that's going on, you know, of just little nuggets? I know it's like, you know, a lot to digest, but what are digestible things that each citizen can do?
There's a lot of help that's needed, but let me just point out that there's been refugees coming to Texas and to Austin. I started working with refugees almost 20 years ago. So there have been refugees being resettled legally through the State Department since then from all parts of the world. But we are a community who thrive on what's in fashion. And right now it's the Afghan situation that's in fashion. So everybody wants to help the Afghans, which is great. But we have to keep in mind that there's also other communities that are coming and everybody needs help. As for refugees, the biggest problem we have in Austin is housing. Housing is so expensive that it doesn't matter how much you make, they're raising the rents double what you can deal with. And the rents have been rising steadily and suddenly right now after they finished all the help that people got during COVID. And so now rents we're hearing are being raised by over $500 a month in some places. So, you know, on the one hand, we're raising the hourly wage, but we're raising it maybe a few dollars, but then the rent is rising so much more. So if people are just aware of the price of just living very humbly, just the basics of life, about how expensive it is, and if there's ways that could be assuaged. As an individual, if you would like to, you know, volunteer to mentor a kid or to help settle a family, I mean, there's a lot of individual volunteer opportunities that a lot of organizations in Austin can need help with, including us. We teach English second language to refugees. But if they can't do the basic life, if the basics of life, the, you know, rent and transportation and communication, if people don't have internet where they live in these apartment complexes, it's too expensive. And then everything is being done online now. So the basics of life need to be looked at, and maybe have some influence on politicians, on business leaders, on anybody to try to help with that. Because we're getting where refugees who are coming to Austin are having to move elsewhere. They're moving out of Austin, and then there's no transportation where they move. They move to Pflugerville, they move south. How can they manage if the prices keep going up? So whatever magic any of you have to try to address that need, that is really the basic. Other than that, there's a lot of organizations you can volunteer and help with.
Thank you for that. Lubna, do you mind dropping your, I don't know if you have access to the chat board, but do you mind dropping IACT or even your contact information or IACT's link in there? Anyone else want to share?
I just wanted to say that one of the things we're doing, and this is not just for Austin, Interconnecting Arabs, Muslim, Middle Easterners is a national organization. What we're trying to do is get the socio-political organizers who are from this background together. Because as we're noticing, we are not connected. We stick into, we're in our little niches. They are country of origin based, they're language based, they're religion based. And the first thing we need to do is notice that if we are on a liberation path in this country, and in the last few years, we seem to be getting back on that path, thank goodness, then as a people, we have a role. And our role is not mimicking whiteness. That's not where we want to be. That's the wrong side of history. So we need to get together. We need to figure out what our role is and what we need to be doing. And so I am going to put, this is our website. Get in touch with us if you feel like you might want to be on this path. Yeah, reach out.
Thank you. And do you want to share more about the podcast? Is that?
Yes. Our series ended. We're going to start the next series, but absolutely. So if you go to iam.org, you can get to our podcast from there. But I want to suggest, if you are Arab, Muslim, or Middle Eastern, and that doesn't mean you have to be religious. That doesn't mean you have to. We especially cater to mixed race folks, mixed religious folks, those who live on the margins, the LGBTQ community. The 90% of those who are born into Islam who might be unmasked. Yeah, so we kind of talk about the folks that seem invisible in this greater culture. Because when we talk about Muslim, we think Osama and his wives. We don't think me. So we are talking about, this is our audience. And I really want to suggest that if you liked hearing about this identity marker, specifically the Arab Muslim Middle Eastern identity marker, that you check out the first 6 or 7 episodes of The Defining Moment. So it's I-AMM, The Defining Moment. And you can access it through the website. But you can also go to any platform that you listen to the podcast to and just put The Defining Moment and you'll see us.
Another way to think of what the group is that we're aiming at is if you're from anywhere from Morocco to Indonesia.
The Islamic kid, basically. Yeah.
And regardless of your religion. So if you're Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, it doesn't Mandean, it doesn't matter. It's a non-religious thing, but from a place that either has a large Muslim minority or is a Muslim majority country. Islam
is a dominant culture there. So perhaps not the most dominant, but it is a dominant culture. So if we think India, it is, so, and of course, the rest of the Muslim majority world, at the countries. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback on a thing that Banafsha said, because I think it's real important. And it was that, assimilation into whiteness is not the answer. And one of the things the United States actually attempted to do was assimilate the Latinx community and the Native American community into whiteness. So when Banafsha was talking about the 19th century racial categories, they were Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, which I think are words that today we would find offensive, but those were the 3 races.
I just saw people's eyes go,
And so what happened was the Native American population and the Latinx population pushed back against that and forced the United States to make 2 new categories. And in fact, the Native Americans have been so successful at resisting assimilation that even though the United States officially declared, like the Borg might, that they were, that the Native Americans in eastern Oklahoma were assimilated. So the Choctaw, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee, they not only lost their reservation, their land was bought up by white people, and in some cases brown and black people, but mostly by white people. And they have just won, as of July last year, they just won a court case called McGirt v. Oklahoma, and those 5 reservations are back. And those Native Americans now own Tulsa, Oklahoma, the 2nd largest city in Oklahoma. And all of a sudden, their resistance against assimilation is actually it's actually paying off. And so the answer that they've discovered is not to assimilate, but to survive and to make it and to keep their identity separate. And at least in the case of the Native Americans and the Latinx population, they've had some serious victories, even if there's lots of defeats along the way. And I think we shouldn't shy away from that kind of a struggle.
I love that you're saying this, Roy. Saba was talking about Trump. 30% of Muslims voted for Trump. I'm going to say this again. 30% of Muslims in the United States who could vote voted for Trump. The person, it is embarrassing. It's horrific, actually. This is because we have no rudder in this country. We don't know we're trying to forget where we came from, and we don't know where we're going, culturally and politically. And the only thing we think is going to hold us together is Wahhabi Islam. not even all the other Islams that actually give meaning, but Wahhabi Islam, literalist Islam. And we're going in that direction because the United States is going in the literalist direction. That's just kind of a cultural thing. So we need to figure out where we're going. What is our position as far as the BLM movement goes? Don't know. We don't know. Everybody's singing their own tune.
You know, it's actually very
sorry.
similar. Oh, sorry. It's actually very similar in the Hindu community, where the folks who are most, I don't want to say they're the most Hindu because I think I'm Hindu, but like the folks who are most conservative Hindu also voted for Trump in overwhelming numbers. And like they're also the most obnoxious who they vote for because, and it's weird because they also like do it in like a very anti-Muslim way. Like they're like happy with the Muslim ban because they're like, oh, in India, like we don't like Muslim people there. And you know, because I work in the space of politics, I hear so often this idea that Republicans, if they're just less racist, they would win all the time because there actually are lots of large conservative populations in all the diverse populations. They just choose not to vote Republican because they're so racist. But as you're pointing out, you know, 30% is not a small number. What happened in South Texas last year is not a fluke. There's no like, the word rudderless is so accurate for so many communities who are like, where do we go? Where's our group? How do we create a vision for the future? Because we don't have one. Yeah.
Well, Black folks have a vision.
And obviously Native Americans too.
And Native Americans too. I'm on board with that one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to jump on a bandwagon because I am new here personally.
The sad thing is that if he runs again, probably 30% would vote for him again. It's because I think one explanation is because in the Middle East, most countries have one of those leaders that's similar to his personality. And so he seems like, okay, this is a strong leader. They're looking for a strong leader because none of our countries, let's face it, have had democracy or can understand, you know, their role in a democracy. So there's a lot of education that needs to take place. But I have relatives who have voted for him twice and are gung-ho in getting him back. And, you know, that there's no logic to it. And I don't understand it personally, but that's what happens. Refugees who could vote, most of them voted for him. I'd like you to know. And he has banned refugees. So they don't see their role in politics because they all, and we come from countries where we really had no say in who governed us. And so we don't see that connection between us and the people we vote for. Voting is just like a thing we do, but we don't see that who we vote for really has a connection with who comes out. So yeah, it's a sad situation.
We did have a democracy. It was Tunisia, but that ended in July.
Also, building on what you were saying, Lubna, I have something happened to me that changed my mind about all of this. I'm not going to name names or get to, I have a family member who voted for Trump. And some time ago, we were having a conversation. And this person is a business owner, and Iranian, obviously. And they were telling me how they were once in a gathering, and they collect clients, right? It's that kind of business. They were in a gathering, and white folks, and this couple were the only people of color, and they're visibly different looking, like they're not white passing. And apparently somebody started a conversation, came to them and said something like, oh, these some uncomfortable derogatory term about some Muslims, but they were, I don't remember the details, and she wasn't forthcoming either. And she tells me, she goes, listen, at that moment, what did you want me to do? That moment and every following moment and every moment before that, I have had to say, you are right. I am not like them. I am more like you. Otherwise, I would not get that business. I would not have this house. I would not have this car. And that really made me realize, oh my God, this happens every day. In the workplace, at school, with friends, with neighbors. Nobody wants confrontation, but it goes beyond confrontation. We want to thrive. In order to thrive, we cannot put ourselves in danger all the time. We can't mark ourselves. So we got to keep eating it and saying, yes, you're right. I'm not that. I'm more like you.
And I think it goes both ways, right? Like what Lubna was saying earlier, it starts with listening. And so when even though people of color are the global majority, our society has to do better on listening and listening to people's stories. And that's why we have these platforms, right? And why you have the podcast, and, Roy, you have a book. What I want to do is, like Saba, as a senior in college, I know I'm so looking forward to your future and people like you, so that you can carry on, no pressure or no, but just the drive and the motivation that you have, to, as a global citizen, regardless of what nation boundaries are, like how, what is your hope and your light that you want to bring, for you and your peers, for Saatvik's daughter, and how, when you are thank you for being part of this conversation. And I just love working with young people and students, because it's a way for us to learn more and listen to younger people too, because you guys have so many ideas and such innovative thoughts. So I would love to hear some of your thoughts too.
Yeah, I feel like I'm beginning to learn how to make room for myself, because I feel like for a while I felt like I had to wait to be given permission to exist in this Western society, but I don't feel like I need permission anymore. I'm making room for myself, and I want people like me, and maybe future generations, to not feel like they need permission to exist in the society that is for them as much as it is for other people who are not racialized or are not a part of a minority. So I I would like to see a world where people exist as they are, unapologetically, and don't feel like they need validation from the white man to exist. So
Thank you for that. And Saatvik, I know you're a huge advocate, and you're active in the community, wonderful father. What do you, when you look in your daughter's eyes, what do you feel like your drive and motivation is?
I used to want to be a lot of things, like be, a high elected official or very rich. And then the first time I brought my daughter home and I was feeding her, and she kind of looked me in the eyes, and all those validations I thought I needed kind of like became immaterial. Because as long as she felt that like this weird, goofy, bad singer was like enough for her, then that was like enough for me. But I think there's two thoughts that I've been kind of meditating a lot. One I kind of mentioned before, which is that be the person you needed when you were a child. And I kind of want to model that for her, because if I do that successfully, then she won't need someone, like she won't be wanting for someone like that. And she'll have role models, including my amazing, super strong, badass wife, as to how to be a brown person in this world. Because if I'm anything like my wife is like, 10x, she's just, whatever. Words don't describe her properly. The second thing, and this is something a friend of mine told me a few weeks ago, is that there's always been a body like mine. That was more in the context of, now I have a dad bod, which I didn't have when I was younger, and I've been feeling weird about it. But the reality is that as a brown person, there's always been someone like me for all of history, and like I shouldn't ever feel othered, because I'm like the bodies that all of us on this Zoom have are completely normal, and they're beautiful, and they're amazing, and they're natural. And I want my daughter to feel the same way too, that if her hair is like really curly and she has like sideburns, it's like, it's okay, because she was, people have been like that for millennia. And she doesn't have to try and be this like, whoever the flavor of the month model is at the time. Like she can be just herself, and that's more than perfect. And I wish that for all the other, Arab API kids too, that like, maybe, whatever those things are that people see us as not white, like those things are just as great as being white. And for me, I think they're better, because I like having my brown skin. I love having my black hair. I love my big nose. My wife might not, but I do. And so I would wish those two things. One, be the person you wish you needed when you were a kid. And two, just like remember that your body has been here for all of history, and it's beautiful and it's amazing. And you don't need to change it at all.
Thank you for that. And as we wrap up, I just want to, before we wrap up, if any committee members have any questions or thoughts, you feel free to drop them in the chat board here on Zoom or on Facebook. And just if you're on Zoom's chat board, I'm just going to read it real quick of some of the comments. So thank you, Shane, for bringing up the fact that those that are older, the hostages taken in Iran in the late 70s was also when a change happened. And Dr. Casagrande, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Casagrande, do you want to drop in your your link to your book? If you want to share that to the audience. And then Saba was sharing, a question to Saba was, have you found that Canada has more vibrant together AAPI or brown community compared to the US? And the response is, I'd say there's fairly similar in big cities, but Arab brown communities have a longer history presence in the States. Immigration in Canada was open to people of color until the 50s, I believe. So thank you for all these comments. Any last words? I think when we always end our Brave Community Conversations, I for one, it's a journey. We're all on this journey together to be in a more compassionate, loving world. And so I love the comments that some of the panelists says, it really begins with listening. I am a big believer that we were, created with 2 ears and 1 mouth. So the more we can listen, we should double listen than talk. I think the more we listen, the more that we can act, and from people and stories and experiences that you all are like the lived experiences. Because sometimes, the media, the textbooks don't have it. They have their own perspectives. And so the more that we're able to listen to lived experiences, the more we're able to unlearn, relearn, and to be able to share our stories together. And then that's how I believe we build a more brave community. And so final words from any of the panelists of your thoughts on being a more brave community.
I was going to comment just a little bit, hopefully shortly, about just Saatvik and Balafshe. I want to thank you, because my generation, I could be your mom, maybe grandma, no, maybe mom, but when I was working in Maryland in the 80s, nobody could say my name, so people did not talk to me. So we'd be at a gathering and they'd see my name tag and they'd like glance at it and just smile and walk off. And I realized very soon it's Lubna, it's a strange name and they don't know how to say it, so people don't talk to me. And I was a reporter at a newspaper, so that did not work. So I switched it to Lou, because I started saying, okay, I introduced myself as Lou, and suddenly everybody was talking to me, and that's fine. And then I could bring in later on, my full name is Lubna, but I go by Lou because it's easier for people. But I'm thinking back that my grandfather came to the US in 1910, and he died in 1947, I think. And in all of his life in the US, his passport, his name was B, the letter B. Because his name was Bashir and he got to Ellis Island, they couldn't say it and they said, okay, you're B. So his official name was B all of his life, to make it easier for white Americans to be able to talk to him. And to this day, it's still a problem, but I admire you for push your name forward. I did not do that. In my generation, it was a little harder, but push your name forward, make people say it. Teach them how to say it correctly. If they say it wrong, it's okay, but that's your name. You don't have to make it short.
Thank you for saying that, Lubna.
I think I have an answer for how to be brave, and it's for both. It's in 2 directions. One of the things that I've experienced is I've had 4 censorship attempts. I fought the first one. It was in 2006, and then I just submitted to the other 3. They were in 2016, 17, and 18. And what I was on a panel in 2018 where we talked about the First Amendment. And one of the panelists was a white man, a conservative, and his whole position was white men couldn't talk anymore. They were the most oppressed people in the world, and their voices were being shut out. And what I had to tell him was, no, nobody's telling you to be quiet. Nobody even has the power to shut you up. What are you talking about? What's happened is you're now hearing all these Black voices and brown voices. You're hearing women voices. You're hearing LGBTQ voices, and you're being forced to share the stage. And you're only ever used to hearing yourselves in an echo chamber. And so I think that to add to this whole idea of listening, one of the things that you should do is, just because you don't agree with the person, maybe don't go through the effort of trying to censor them. Maybe don't go through the effort of trying to shut them up. And then also, for that matter, vote for politicians who aren't little fascists. Wouldn't it be great if we could just never have another Hitler or Mussolini or Trump again, or Franco or Pol Pot? I feel like maybe we should get pickier with our leadership and listen to each other better, and the combination might be effective.
As to that. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you all. I think, was there one more comment, a question? And so I think the comment was maybe a question to what Lubna was saying. Would you consider some people just unreachable? I particularly struggle with listening, being patient with people that I want to believe are reachable, but are seemingly too stubborn or ultimately won't take off their rose-colored glasses.
I think everybody's reachable at some point, but even though I, flippantly said, yeah, that's right, some people are unreachable, but I think some people are unreachable by some people. I mean, I'm probably too impatient to work through angering words, but other people might, and maybe there's other ways to reach those people. Maybe it's not for you, but it might be for someone else.
Yeah, and oh, good, Banasha.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to add that we've talked a lot about whiteness and white folks. And this is not about DNA. It's about a culture. Germans who came to the United States became white. Greeks became white. Italians became white. This is a process of stripping away anything that has to do with communal and going towards individualism, what whiteness means today is what works best within a capitalist structure. So when we talk about whiteness, that's what we mean. It isn't necessarily a DNA thing.
And then there are categories of whiteness, like, for example, Spaniards, Italians, and Greeks are sub-white. They're not really white. They're sort of like dirty white.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm talking more about sort of this is a longer conversation. But yeah, I was making a distinction about the cultural sort of discussion around whiteness is just a way of being, which is very enmeshed with capitalism and individualism and perfectionism and all the things.
And we're all steeped in whiteness, regardless
Absolutely.
of what racial.
Every single one. We're all steeped in anti-blackness and we're all steeped in whiteness. Secretly wanting to be whiter and whiter. Yes. Yes.
So, but as we wrap up our time, I just want to honor everyone's time. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the community members. I am just going to drop a few things in for Brave. We have, I don't know how you learned about us, but here's our social media links. And then also I am going to do a short survey. You'll also probably get it if you registered online, but if you do have like 1 or 2 minutes, we just always love your feedback so that we can improve our programs. And yes, Saatvik, we just want, can we see her? Do we mind?
Oh, Saatvik, I'm touching wood right here.
So beautiful, so beautiful. And Brave, we are going to be bringing back our monthly community conversations. Yet next month we have a special event. It is our 4th annual Brave Fest. We were going back and forth whether we're doing it in person, virtual, hybrid. Right now we have it on the books for November 13th at the ballroom, which is like formerly Spider House Ballroom, but it's now just the ballroom with the new ownerships. So please save the date, November 13th from 2 to 6 p.m. And so that is going to be in person. We might also do a virtual. So please fill out that survey if you have time, just a minute or two. Our next event will be November 13th. That is going to be the Brave Fest. It's a little out of community conversations, a celebration of inclusion, belonging, community. We have diverse performances. Last year, Saatvik performed his dancing virtually. And so we've got a great diverse acts. And then also, if I know and we'll send out over the newsletter. So feel free to join our newsletter. Some of the links and the organizations that are doing wonderful things. What we have here on the chat board of IAM's podcast, Dr. Casagranda's book, every great thing that IACT is doing. And then if you want to be more involved with Brave, we have great opportunities for you to be involved. We have, if you want to help out with administrative or this technical side of things, so I'm not multitasking. And thank you, Christina, for helping in the back end of chatting and Zooming and cutting links. So we always can use help on our events. And then also we have a weekly food distribution that we do for the low-income families in South Austin. So if you want to deliver food or help us distribute, and then also event planning. So that's a way that you can get more involved with Brave. So thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and let's continue to build relationships, awareness, voices, and engagement, and be brave. Thank you.
Thank you, Emlyn, for having us. This was awesome. Appreciate you
you.
so much.
Thank you. I'm just going to read these comments. I am a student of Dr. Casagranda's, and I found this to be so informational from the perspective of a young white woman. I am looking forward to attending more events and expanding my knowledge and understanding. Thank you. Thank you all so much. And I'll be in touch over email. Bye.
Bye.